Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everyone to ProductTank Lagos. Today is a super important day because it's also World Product Day. So happy World Product Day to everyone. I'm super happy that you're able to join us this evening. We know that you've had like probably long days at work, so we're honored to have you here. In our usual fashion, I'm going to start off by telling us what ProductTank is, what Mind Your Product is, and about World Product Day. Then I will introduce our speaker, hand you over to him. He will go through a presentation about, okay, I'll tell you that later. And then I'll be back for a quick question and answer session. Okay, so let's get right into it. ProductTank started about 10 years ago by a group of like-minded people in London. They came together and said, this product management thing, what exactly are we doing? What are the challenges that we've gone through? How were we able to scale these challenges? And how have we learned from these things, right? And from our learnings, how are we able to help other people grow through their career and just like generally share how to be better at the craft? In Lagos, we started in April 2017. We've had 4 meetups yearly. We have an incredible audience. Thank you guys, as always. And I'll just go back now. So we have ProductTank in 200 local communities all over the world, right? Today, we're having almost every one of us running a World Product Day meetup. So after this stream, if you keep staying on the Mind Your Product YouTube channel, you will see every other one streaming, and you can go back and watch some of the events that I've streamed earlier before Lagos. It's a global professional network for product people, like I mentioned before, and together our mission is to make product people more successful, by coming together to ensure that we're doing what's right for the companies that we're in. That is Lagos right there, by the middle. Like I said before, we have 3,000 plus community members, and we are super happy to have you guys here with us. I will introduce our speaker and just add him right to the stream. Dave is a Chief Product and Technology Officer at Zoopla. Hi, Dave. I just added him right there. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. And one of the things that I tell people each time I say, oh, Dave is speaking in Lagos, is this man literally put all of his 25 years of product management into 20 minutes. And I have a video that I'll show you for that. So when we put out a survey and asked for speakers to volunteer to speak at ProductTank Lagos, and I saw his name, it was a serious fangirl moment. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take him up on this opportunity, and super happy that you accepted to do this, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us in Lagos today. And hopefully when we're able to travel, maybe you'll come speak in person or we'll meet at one of the conferences.
Absolutely. I mean, and hello Lagos. I have to say, I've spoken all over the world. I've spoken on several continents. I've never wanted to be in the actual place of the presentation more than I want to be in Lagos right now. I really do. So the agreement is I'll give the talk now virtually, sitting here in cold and rainy London. But when we can all get back together, I want another invitation to come do a ProductTank in Lagos.
You have it, sure. Definitely. So cool. I will leave you all to Dave now, and I will be back after his presentation. All right, then over to you, Dave.
Excellent. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us. As Zainab said, when they put out the call to support ProductTank Lagos, I jumped at the chance. There's nothing I like more than talking about product. The chance to learn about the community of product people in Lagos has been, and the companies and everything that's happening has been amazing. And genuinely, I'm incredibly excited at the prospect of being able to come and actually visit you there in person. And so consider this a trial run for that event. So what I want to talk about today is something that I call product market drift. Product market drift is, in order to understand what product market drift is, you first need to understand what product market fit is. For those of you who know, product market fit is probably a concept that was popularized by Mark Andreessen, who was one of the early founders of a company called Netscape, which I would imagine predates many of you in terms of age. But he was one of the early founders of Netscape, and he coined the phrase product market fit. And very, very simply put, product market fit is about taking a problem that a customer wants solved and hoping that the problem you solve intersects with those two things. So the problem that you solve as a company is a problem that a customer wants solved. So that's something that we can all hope for. Now, the reality of the situation is that many companies, many of us miss the mark, right? We go out with a value proposition that does not, in fact, ever achieve product market fit. And there are many famous examples of companies that have failed, at least in the first instance, to achieve product market fit. For those of you who don't know the story behind some of these companies, Slack started off as a gaming company called Glitch. And Slack, the product that we all know and love today, actually was an internal messaging tool that company used to build a failed game. And they wanted in the end to salvage some of the software that they'd created. And so they decided to see if they could sell this messaging product that ultimately became this world famous messaging product. So Flickr is another great example. Flickr was also founded by the same founder, Stuart Butterfield, founder of Slack. In his first attempt to create a massive online game, also failed. There was a company called Ludicorp, and that ultimately became Flickr, which again may predate many of you on the video, but the photo sharing and storage service. Twitter famously was a podcasting app called Odeo before it became the messaging platform that we know today. Instagram was a ripoff of Foursquare called Bourbon in its first incarnation. I think we all know the origins of this particular company. YouTube was a video dating app called Tune In and Hook Up. My favorite pivot, though, is got to be a company called Qtol. Now, in the United States, in the late 19th century, Qtol was a very popular wall cleaner. When all the homes in the country were heating their homes with coal, heating your home with coal left a lot of soot on the wall. And Qtol was a company that allowed you to basically take these balls of putty, roll them on the wall to get the soot off your wall. But as the country transitioned from heating homes with coal to heating homes with oil, Qtol really faced a real struggle in staying relevant in the market. But they did the best pivot of all. They turned themselves into the company that we all now know and love as the company called Play-Doh, and they've sold over 3 billion cans of that wall cleaner in the form of a children's toy since they made that pivot. And I always find it interesting that we lionize these big transitions and pivots, and we always talk about pivoting, because for me, we're celebrating the fact that we didn't do our job very well. We're celebrating that as product managers, we built something that nobody wanted, that it failed, and the whole company had an existential crisis that forced them to change gears and focus on something completely different. So I'm not sure why we celebrate these things so much. Now, before you all start to look down your noses at these silly American companies who have gone through these epic pivots when they first missed the mark, remember that you have many local companies who have gone through some of these epic pivots as well. And some of you may even work at some of these companies. So it happens to everybody around the world. It happens to the best of us. But I am always a bit surprised at how we celebrate effectively these failures for product managers to do their job. Now, the good news is that if you are a product manager at a reasonably successful company today, you probably have product market fit in your product and in your company, if you're not going through one of these epic pivots. Now, the bad news is, however, that you have a problem. As soon as you have product market fit, it is inevitable that you start to suffer from something that I call product market drift. So any successful company that finds itself with having product market fit immediately starts to succumb to the insidious destructive forces of product market drift. Now, I define product market drift as this: the tendency over time for companies to fail to respond to the changing needs and tastes of their customers. We have a graph here that over time, the product market fit starts to fade, right? You've got Slack in the upper left there. And you've got obviously the obvious story of Kodak, famously fell out of touch with the market and drifted into oblivion. And arguably Facebook's somewhere in between right now. You start to see certainly in more developed companies that Facebook's membership is starting to actually drop, and they've gone through a bunch of controversy lately. So even a company is with 3 billion users or approaching 3 billion users suffers from product market drift. It happens to all of us, and all we can do is endeavor to fight it on a daily basis. Now, there are a couple of root causes for product market drift, and I want to talk about what those are today, because I want you at the end of this discussion to be able to see them happening in your company and have some tools in your toolbox to go out and combat them. So the first of these insidious forces that's driving product market drift is something that I call diffusion of focus. It's something that starts to pull apart that fit. It starts to cause you to drift away from solving the problems that your customers want. In all of us, any successful company inevitably starts to succumb to a diffusion of focus. In the beginning, you have this lovely, beautiful moment. It's amazing. You have one job when you have product market fit in the beginning on your journey. You have one job. For a brief moment, your only job in the world is to serve the customer. And let's just take a moment to enjoy this, because it's not going to last long. There she is. Just look at her. There's not a care in the world. And her wish is our demand. But that moment is fleeting, because as soon as you have a successful product, you start to succumb to this diffusion of focus and product market drift. Because what do you do with a successful product? You have to start marketing it. You have to start promoting it. If you have product market fit, you want more people to know about your product. And so you, as the product manager, start to have not only your customer to serve, but now your product marketing team might come to you with a few interesting things. They might say, hey, we need help in putting some tags on the page. We need some landing pages. We need some of your effort to be taken away from focusing on the customer to focusing on us trying to promote the product. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's inevitable that we're going to have to market our products. But this is where the diffusion of focus starts. And as you continue to grow and continue to have success, you might want to market and sell your product in other countries. And so the team might come to you, and the commercial team might come to you, and they might say, hey, so we're going to need some language changes, and there's some currency changes, and there's different payment service providers. And so suddenly, again, not only are you trying to serve the customer, but you're serving the marketing team. And now you've got demands on the team's time and your effort with the commercial team. And you continue to enjoy success over time. And you might say, look, we've really saturated the market with our core product. Let's start to build other new products. And suddenly you've got other people, all kinds of stakeholders continuing to come to you. And surely enough, over time, your growth starts to slow, because the amount of time that you're spending focusing on solving the customer's problem is a fraction of what it was at the beginning. And then you start the death knell, the beginning of the end, which is instead of trying to grow by solving more people's problems, you start to grow by trying to reduce your costs. And that's even a different set of challenges and a different set of focuses. And this is what it looks like when you suffer internally from a diffusion of focus, where once you spent your whole time trying to deliver on solving your customer's problem, now you've got so many internal customers that customer, she gets barely a fraction of the time that you have to spend with your team and your time and your effort of the company. So diffusion of focus is the first insidious driver of product market drift. The second is inertia. Inertia is one of the most destructive forces in the universe. It's when you hear somebody say, well, why do we do it that way? It's because that's the way that we've always done it. And it really is one of those insidious focuses that continues to drive you away from solving your customers' problems. Now, my favorite example, and many of you would have probably heard me talk about this before, but my favorite example of inertia is to try and explain why we have a 5-day work week. Now, in order to explain why we have a 5-day work week, you first need to understand why we have a 7-day week. And for that, we need to go back about 3,000 years to the ancient Babylonians. Now, the ancient Babylonians, 3,000 years ago, looked up in the sky and they said, well, there are 7 planets in the sky. And so therefore, that must be a sign. Clearly, we need to start dividing time into 7 pieces. And that was how they decided to divide a week into 7 days. Every 24 hours, you have a day, and then the week is a unit of 7 of those. Now, for the keen-eyed amongst you, there's one hitch in this plan, is that there are not 7 planets. There are, in fact, 8 in Neptune, but the Babylonians couldn't see Neptune. And so therefore, clearly, they were missing the message from the gods that there should actually be 8 days in the week. But as it is, we ended up with 7 days in the week, and that's how we have a 7-day week. So now then we need to ask ourselves, why do we have a 5-day work week and a 2-day weekend? And for that, we need to fast forward about 2,800 years to the late 19th, early 20th century, to the Industrial Revolution, to these fine gentlemen here. Now, and it comes down to the church. So the church was suffering from a decrease in attendance during that period of time, and they were starting to get worried. And they started to ask the question, why are we seeing fewer people in church on Sunday? And it turns out that because Sunday was really the only day that people were allowed not to go to work if they were working in some of these factories. And so it turns out that they were going out on the only night they had off, which was Saturday night, and they were going out and getting drunk. And they were missing church in the morning because they had a terrible hangover. And so the church went to the industrial lords and they said, look, give people Saturday off so that they can go out on Friday night and get drunk, recover from their hangover on Saturday, and then they can come in and they can come to church on Sunday. So despite science that tells us that a 5-day work week and an 8-hour workday for that matter, is the least optimal way for humans to do work, despite very clear evidence that this is suboptimal in the extreme, we have a 5-day work week because the ancient Babylonians couldn't see Neptune, and these guys were too busy getting drunk to go to church. And that's the only reason why we have a 5-day work week. And it just shows you the power of inertia. There's no good reason why we do this. In fact, there's lots of good evidence why we shouldn't do this. But because it's the way we've always done it, it continues on in force. And companies experience this as well. Companies experience this all the time. And it's an incredibly powerful force where companies fail to react. They try to do things the way they've always done them. They fail to react to new information. Humans don't like to take in new information. In fact, we're biologically, evolutionarily designed to resist taking in new information because it's very expensive for our brains to create new synapses. And tens of thousands of years ago, it cost a lot of calories for us to create those connections in our brains. And so we resist doing it. We resist taking in new information. We were not designed to be product managers in the 21st century, doing product management in technology companies and other companies. We just simply weren't. So inertia is an incredibly powerful force that drives product market drift because people are failing to adapt to the new information that they have. And by the way, I don't care what anybody says. In my heart, Pluto will always be a planet. So technically, we should now have a 9-day week if you want to go by the gods up in the sky. Now, the third powerful force that drives product market drift is risk aversion. And it's one of those, again, powerful forces that further drives the problems that we're solving and our value proposition in our companies from the problems that our customers want solved. It's a cognitive bias. It's commonly called loss aversion. You'd rather not lose the thing that you already have than gain something new. It's much more painful for people to lose money than it is for people to win the same amount of money. And they'd rather not lose the money than win the money. And that's been demonstrated many, many times in all kinds of experiments. Loss aversion, we don't want to lose. So once we become successful as a company, we become risk averse, and we try to manage that risk and that fear and that anxiety by putting stuff in spreadsheets and creating lots of predictability and forecastability, right? And we think that if we can just put it in an elaborate prioritization framework, that somehow we will lower our risk. Now, what this means is that you start taking fewer risks and you start solving not for the customer and solving her problems, but you solve for predictability. You solve for the things that you know you can go do, as opposed to the things that you probably should be doing because your customers are asking for them. So we try to quantify everything, but then many times we spend more time quantifying it and making a business case than we do if we actually would just run an experiment to see if we could make it work. But one of the trappings of success, one of the main drivers of product market drift is risk aversion. It's companies who are solving for predictability and they want high confidence levels in timings and delivery. And the worst thing that can really happen is if a company becomes publicly listed, because then your time horizon, really, you're solving for the next 90 days and really doing interesting things to solve customers' problems in profound and innovative ways rarely happen conveniently and neatly in 90-day increments. And so one of these drivers of product market drift is companies becoming risk averse because they're successful and they don't want to let go of that success. And so they become more and more risk averse. And this is an insidious driver of product market drift inside all of our companies. And I know that if I was there with you and I was looking out into the audience, I would see all of you nodding and smiling and shaking your head and rolling your eyes because we've all experienced this. Now, if that weren't bad enough, the problem is actually getting worse, I'm sorry to say. Product market drift is accelerating. 100 years ago, you could hope as a very successful company to be around for 6 or 7 decades. As you can see over time, the average lifespan of a successful company, so one that has achieved product market drift, is shrinking dramatically over time. And in fact, now, you're lucky if you make it to a decade before you become completely oblivious and fully succumb to the powers, the insidious drivers of product market drift. A century ago, the line looked like this. Today, it looks a lot more like this, right? It's precipitous. 12 years ago, the iPhone didn't even exist. And today, people are, today your customers are live tweeting from their Fitbit about how many calories they burned today riding the Tour de France in virtual reality from the exercise bike in their guest bedroom while tracking the precise GPS coordinates via satellite of the delivery guy bringing the chicken lo mein they ordered on their phone 20 minutes ago while sitting on the couch, checking Instagram and binge watching the Game of Thrones. That was just a little bit more than a decade ago that none of those things existed. And now that's what we've all come to expect. And the biggest companies in the world, Google, Apple, Facebook, they're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars and pounds setting people's expectations about what they should expect. The people's expectations of your company are not set by you. They're set by these global conglomerates with massive budgets. So customers' expectations are going even more extreme, and it's even more difficult to stay in touch with that if you're succumbing from product market drift. Equally, the barriers to entry for creating a new company are effectively zero. You can start a new company that is global in scale as Amazon or Google or Facebook, effectively for free. It costs nothing. It takes very little effort for someone to introduce a new offering into the market. And so you've got ever increasing customer expectations and you've got lowering barriers to entry. So it's becoming even more difficult and more crucial that we avoid succumbing to product market drift. Now, what can we do about this? That's the question. And these are some of the things that I want you each to take back to your businesses when you go back tomorrow. Remembering that tomorrow is the 4th day of your 5-day work week, unless you live in Israel or a couple of other countries. But how do we fight market drift? Well, at the end of the day, it comes down to culture. And if you'll recall, culture is, it's nothing ethereal. It's nothing magical. For me, I very clearly define it as the collective manifestation of the individual actions of everybody in your company. And it's the celebrations and the things that you celebrate. It's how you incent and motivate. It's the ceremonies that you undertake as a company. It's how you make decisions. It's the behaviors that you model. It's the language that you use. It's the rituals that you practice within your company. all of those things combined to create your corporate culture. And what I would suggest today is that you need to start adding behaviors and actions to your culture that start to give you resistance to product market drift, that start to inoculate you, if you will, from this insidious virus that is product market drift. And where do we begin? Well, if you've ever heard me talk before, you know that everything starts with the customer. And the first behavior that I would suggest, and these are very simple, and when I've given this talk before, people always kind of think about, yeah, Dave, but what's the real trick? And I genuinely believe the real trick is just always going back to basics and just saying, what's in it for the customer? With every decision that you need to make, ask the question, what's in it for the customer? With every prioritization, with every cost decision, with every all the decisions that we're all faced with in product, but also in other parts of the company, just ask a question when you're in that meeting debating how you should make that decision. If we do this, what's in it for the customer? That's the thing that we lose as we succumb to product market drift over time. We forget about the customer. We stop solving for the customer. We start solving for our internal problems. We don't have a customer problem anymore. We've got a conversion rate problem. We've got an SEO problem. We've got a page speed problem. We've got a manufacturing problem. And those are how we start to talk about our problems. And so I would say, go back into work tomorrow and reintroduce this very simple question in every meeting that you attend, every decision that you make, every decision that somebody else makes. Just ask the question, what's in it for the customer? You need to start to reintroduce these behaviors into your company if you're going to build a culture that's resilient against product market drift. Apple, they're the most customer-focused company on the planet, right? Well, I don't think so. I think even Apple suffers from product market drift, right? How many of you have one of these, right? These are 30 pounds. In the UK, these are 30 pounds each because Apple decided that they wanted to make some changes that none of their customers were asking for and none of their customers wanted. And now there's an extra thing to carry around, an extra thing to lose, and an extra thing to buy when you lose it. And they cost 30 pounds each for this little tiny thing. So this is Apple solving one of Apple's problems and having complete disregard for the fact that this just creates problems for their actual customers. So even a company like Apple succumbs to product market drift. Now, there's an amazing company in the States called Zappos, and they're one of my favorite companies because they have really embraced and embodied asking what's in it for the customer and making this a part of their culture. If you go and buy, and Zappos is famous in the States for selling shoes online, but now they sell a bunch of other kinds of things. But if you go and buy a pair of shoes, Zappos is actually magical. Zappos will give you a year to return that pair of shoes. So again, in online retail in the States, historically, companies were disincented from allowing people to return products. And in fact, people in customer service had incentives to make it difficult for people to return products. But that's a massive barrier if you were being asked to buy a product where you can't try it on, a soft good like clothing, where it's not a commodity that you can compare on specifications, but you really need to try it on and see how it looks and how it feels. And so this is a massive barrier to the growth of selling soft goods in an online space. And Zappos was the first company to say, hey, what's in it for the customer here? Like, let's actually solve for the customer and what they're wanting to do. And what you saw was people would start to buy 2 or 3 different sizes of the same pair of shoes. Because what Zappos did was they send you the return label, free returns. They would send you the return label in the box. You could do it within a year. And it felt magical at the time when everyone else was trying to make it difficult for you to return products online. Zappos allowed you to do, they gave you a year and they allowed you to do it for free. And they fundamentally changed how people and Americans related to buying soft goods online because they focused on the customer and they built this in to their corporate culture. So Facebook's a great example of a company that's customer focused, right? Well, again, I think we've all watched Facebook stumble and fall and start to succumb to product market drift. And they're really now Facebook has a membership problem. Facebook has all kinds of political problems. Facebook's looking internally at solving Facebook's problems, and they're drifting. And that's why we shouldn't be surprised, because the power of product market drift is so profound that even a company with billions of users suffers from it. And Facebook is not exempt from that. So that's how powerful it is. So don't expect that your company and you are exempt from this. You have to start building a corporate culture that inoculates you against the power of product market drift. Disney. Now, Disney is a great example of a company that has managed over its decades of history, decades of continuing to innovate and stay focused and build into their culture, always just asking, what can we do for our customer, right? Let's focus our efforts on solving our customer's problem. Let's resist succumbing to those drivers of product market drift. And they continue all these years later, when they don't need to, arguably, to continue to push forward on innovating people's experience with Disney online, in their theme parks. There's all kinds of exciting things that they're doing and innovating and really leading on. And they've been managed to do that for decade after decade after decade. And that only comes when you start to build some of this focus into your corporate culture, into your rituals, into your ceremonies, into your language. And what I'm suggesting is that just start by inserting into the behaviors that you exhibit every day, asking the question, what's in it for the customer? Evernote's a really customer-focused company, right? Well, probably not so much. Evernote is one of the biggest examples I've ever seen of a company that has succumbed to product market drift. Evernote was free for everyone. They didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really know why people were using their product and what people were willing to pay for. So when they started to charge more money for things, people went berserk. They hated it. They saw a massive drop-off. Evernote was solving Evernote's revenue and profitability problem. And they changed their pricing structure, not because it was in the best interest of the customer, but because they were solving Evernote's problems. And that led to a mass exodus away from them. And the thing that I love about their explanation of why they made these changes is that these pricing changes reflect the significant investment of energy, time, and money that's put into offering the service, and that it's committed to never relying on ads or selling user data to sustain its business. So they're basically saying Evernote is suffering from a revenue problem. Rather than paying Evernote money because they solve your problem, they want you to give them your money because they're trying really hard. And what's more, there's a veiled threat in here, which is if you don't start to give them the money, they might have to go back on that commitment to never sell your data. There's a veiled threat here. This is a company that's lost its way, right? It's fully succumbed to product market drift. They've lost sight of solving their customers' problems because they're spending so much time trying to solve their own problems. Now, Netflix, easy, obviously example, but I just love Netflix has reinvented itself completely as a company, not pivoted, reinvented itself as a company 3 and arguably 4 times. And it's because they've built into their culture a focus on always solving customers' problems. I call it out only because, in the last 6 months, you really started to see this feature pop out, which is skipping the intro on a given television show. And, no doubt they watched people starting to watch television programs on Netflix and everyone fast forwarding through the intro to the program, but then they fast forward too far, then they have to back up, and then they reverse too much, and then they fast forward again, and they spend more time going back and forth and fast forwarding and rewinding than they would if they could just skip. So Netflix, despite being the global leader, arguably a monopoly, a company that, company that makes billions and billions and billions of dollars every year, still is focused on the detail, is watching what their customers need and trying to deliver them solutions. And I love Netflix for that. Now, look, I'm not pretending that this is easy, right? I'm not saying that, you come here, we have a chat about this, and then you can elegantly and easily navigate this tension between doing what's, keeping your company in business and keeping your company solvent and profitable and driving revenue and growth whilst continuing to serve your customer. It's a really hard problem, right? I don't pretend that it's easy. And the reality, what that looks like is a lot more like this. But what I would suggest is that to become resilient as a company, you need to start building into your language of your company, into the rituals and the ceremonies of your company, kind of actions and behaviors that allow you to resist those driving forces of product market drift. And so remember, just go into work tomorrow in a meeting and say, hey, we're talking about doing this. We're talking about investing our precious human capital in building this out. What's in it for the customer? Just try it. See if it works. I guarantee. I know it sounds simple. I know it probably sounds unsatisfying, but I promise you that the value of this is in the compounding effect of all of you in the company starting to ask this on a daily basis. That's when it really starts to take hold and become powerful. So you need to ask what's in it for the customer, but you also need to listen to the customer. And they are screaming. Your customers are screaming at you. Now, 10 years ago, it was incredibly hard, actually, to listen to your customers. If you wanted to really go out and talk to customers in an online business, it was difficult. It was a lot of manual effort. It was a lot of expense, expensive research firms and everything else. But today, as product managers, we have no excuse. We are overwhelmed with our customers trying to tell us what they think about our products. In an hour of desk research today, you can learn more than a team of researchers could have learned in weeks 10 years ago. And so you do need to listen to all the feedback loops that you have coming back from your customers in any mechanism that you can. You have no excuse. And by the way, I don't think this is the sole responsibility of the product manager. I don't think that it's the sole responsibility of a UX researcher if you have the luxury of having a UX researcher. I think everyone in the company needs to be in touch and listening to the customers all the time. Everyone needs to spend time sitting in front of their desk, or better yet, talking to actual customers. It's a lot easier today to speak to your actual users and customers than it was several years ago. I point out a company that I think does this really well. It's a challenger bank in the UK. It's a company called Monzo, and they publish their roadmap online. They publish it for everyone to see, their competition, their customers, and everyone else, and they invite feedback, and they get thousands of comments from their users on how to prioritize and requests and comments on the plans and everything else. They've always been incredibly transparent about this because they've done a good job of remaining focused on the customer, asking what's in it for the customer and listening to the customer. And I think they've done a great job. So you have to ask what's in it for the customer. You have to listen to the customer, and then you have to be able to observe the customer. And this is about data. And one of the biggest challenges for existing companies is to be more data informed. And I don't like to say data driven. I like to say data informed because I think a good product manager brings insight, signals, data from a number of different areas in order to drive well-informed decisions. And data is one of those things, but data is absolutely crucial. So you need the tools, you need the infrastructure, you need the facilities in order to be able to observe how your customers are behaving, both out in the wild and how you're interacting with them. You need to be able to measure a happy customer. And I would ask every one of you in the audience, how do you measure in data? How do you measure a happy customer? Do you know what a satisfied customer looks like at your company defined in data? Do you have the definition of that? Do you have the reporting capabilities, the data and analytics capabilities to be able to identify and define what a happy customer looks like in data? You need to make sure that everyone has access to the data. 10 years ago, again, it was about a centralized team that was writing code in order to ask questions, and you could get a report if you were lucky kind of once a quarter. But now companies really need to give every employee the tools to have direct access, firsthand access to the data so that they can sit there and be observing the customer and have access to the data in order to inform their decisions. And then ask yourself, how do you use data in the culture that you have around decision making? Just like you should ask, what's in it for the customer, you should also be asking, what data are we using to support this decision? Or what data do we need in order to be confident about this decision? Now, there are plenty of excuses, right? It's hard to get data. We don't all have the data. We've got legacy tech, and there's no way it's going to take 6 months to implement that and this and everything else. But there are ways of getting it, right? There are ways of shortcutting around that. You can do it on the cheap. You can do it quickly. It's not an excuse. You don't have any excuses. Like this is one of the most crucial things that you can do in a culture is drive the importance and the value of data in a culture. Understand how you measure a happy customer. Understand how in your culture do you want to start using in your language and in your decision making and in your meetings and in your rituals and your ceremonies. How do you want to emphasize the importance of data? Because until everyone knows its importance, has access to it, and uses it in decision making, you are exposing yourself to the power, the deadly power of product market drift. So my wish for each of you is that you battle product market drift. I've identified here today what I believe are the drivers of product market drift, the drivers that make successful companies into failed companies that drift off into oblivion. It's very clearly that diffusion of focus, losing sight of the fact that you're solving your customers' problems because you're focused on solving your internal problems. It's that risk aversion, right? It's trying to hold on to being successful and really focusing on what you can predict the team can do as opposed to what's in the best interest of the customer. And then it's not listening to your customers. It's not have the data to use as a part of your culture and your decision making. So my wish for you is that you do one very simple thing if you do nothing else, which is go into work tomorrow, again, on Thursday, the 4th day of our arbitrary 5-day work week. And in a meeting, do it once, just do it once. When you having a meeting about a decision, about a prioritization, about anything, just ask, if we do this, what's in it for the customer? Because after all, that's the reason why you exist in the first place. So with that, I will say thank you. And Zainab, I'm more than happy if people have questions live or in chat to take any.
Thank you so very much for that. I'm just trying to see if people have questions. I can't see anything in the chat yet. Please, everyone, feel free to drop your questions now. We'll answer them. If you're unable to log into YouTube to do that, you can tweet at us at ProductTank Lag, and I will pick them and ask you. But I have 3 that I was taking notes. So I have 3 that I will ask, and then we'll take the other ones from the audience. So say I am a B2B company, right? And I have different businesses with varying requirements. How do I strike a balance in defining what my should I say my fit is, or what my value proposition is? Do I just keep tweaking my solution to be able to do whatever all of these companies are doing, or do I just stick to what my value proposition is and say, see, this is what we do, and this is what we have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, B2B is tough. It's different and harder in many ways than trying to do B2C for all the reasons I think that we know. I mean, there are sales cycles are longer, right? So you have fewer opportunities to get feedback. And the business processes are more complex. They have more users. You're solving for more actors in a complicated business process. Additionally, one of the biggest challenges in trying to serve B2B customers is that you have different people using your product versus the people who are deciding to purchase your product. And that might even be different from a third group of people who have to pay for your product. And so you've got many more masters to serve in a B2B context. I think unless your company's business model is to build bespoke solutions for companies, and that's a perfectly legitimate business model, but unless that is the business model, I think it's really deadly to get caught kind of solving for an individual customer. Because without at least validating that that's a problem that many more of your customers have, or that your target customers, people that are not yet your customers, it's a problem that they have. You need to hold the line. It's incredibly hard. I mean, it's hard. It's easy to say. It's hard as a PM to try and hold the line and say, no, I know that customer wants this, but I know that that serves a tiny part of our market. And the time spent solving for this one individual customer comes at the expense of solving a more important problem that more of our target market has. So if you can, hold the line. And you always start with, if you're interacting with that stakeholder, someone in sales, someone in commercial, you can just say, what's in it for all of our customers, as opposed to you're bringing me what's in it for this particular customer. You can ask that question, put it back on them, see what their answer is.
Okay, thank you. We have this question here from Melanie. She says, how do you combine all the different information from customer interviews, tests, and analytics to make decision making? Is it possible to use one tool for all of it?
One tool for all of it, Google Docs.
Right.
I think a really good PM draws on a number of different signals, right? They have a bunch of different feedback loops that they have about how their product is being used, its commercial success, its customer satisfaction. Hopefully you have a variety of signals that you can draw from, because you need to be able to triangulate between them. And you need to be able to kind of build an overall kind of synthesis of all of those different feedback points. I think, is there one tool for them all? No, there isn't. And I do think that PMs get overly enamored with tools, right? They're constantly looking around when they get overwhelmed to find that there's got to be a tool that's going to help me do this. And the reality is that there isn't. And the time that you're spending looking for that tool that doesn't exist is time that you're not spending actually doing the research and reading the feedback and listening to the feedback loops and the signals and trying to then incorporate that into the decision making that you're doing about your product. So make sure you've got lots of signals, make sure that you're digesting them and absorbing them and questioning them, right? You can make very easily make ill-informed questions off the back of, a vocal minority of people that are shouting on social media, right? They could represent a tiny fraction of your customer base, but because they're shouting so loud, you might solve for them and then suddenly discover that all of your other customers didn't need that. And so they're going to go find their solution elsewhere. So don't worry about the tools. Make sure you have your feedback loops. Make sure you're constantly exposing yourself to them. There's not one tool that fits all.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So the second one from Khadija says, hi, Khadija. Growth typically comes with conflicting priorities for the customer and the company. Is product market drift inevitable, meaning you have to do your best to deal with it, or can it be avoided?
Well, I think what I'm suggesting here, whilst I think it can be quite dire sounding when I give this presentation, I actually give it because I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that you can overcome it, right? There are many, many examples of companies not overcoming it. And in fact, the companies that endure over years, over decades, and sometimes centuries are companies that have managed to overcome it because they built into their culture making sure that they're not succumbing to product market drift, that they're inoculating themselves, that they're focusing on the customer problem, that they're resisting this risk aversion, that they're constantly challenging the status quo and inertia. And again, I go back and it's too easy and I need to find more interesting examples, but like Netflix, right? Netflix took very intentional steps from being a DVD company to a streaming company to a media company. And because they were constantly reinventing themselves because they continue to listen to the customer. But it's hard. It's such human nature. I think and kind of my point here is you're fighting human nature when you're fighting product market drift. And so you have to think at the culture level and at the individual behavior level. And that's why I'm saying the power of all of you going into work tomorrow and asking what's in it for the customer is the first step. And I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that you can resist it. The numbers would suggest otherwise in many cases. But each of you, you're a PM. You have to be a champion for the customer, right? You have to believe that you can overcome it. I do. Okay. Good question, Khadija.
Okay. This is from Nifemi. The more interesting question or reality will be to know how to prevent product market drift. when the highest paid person opinion or other senior stakeholders are tilting in that direction?
This is tough. This is why I said, like, I'm not pretending this is easy, because I know it's not. I've been both the PM and the hippo, and I've made the mistakes on both sides of this coin many, many times. But I think there's power, Nifemi, in when you're in the room with the hippo. Like, how can you be faulted for asking, "Hey, so what's in this for the customer?" Like, I mean, if you have senior leaders in your organization who are going to fault you for that or penalize you for that, or if your culture frowns upon somebody, particularly a PM, asking that question, I would kind of challenge whether or not you might, and I hesitate to say this because I always get myself in trouble, you might want to go find a job somewhere else where they care more about that. Life's too short. I always get myself in trouble when I say that, by the way.
That's fine. I have another one here from Kimmy. She says, can you give examples of data-driven answers to the what is the satisfied customer?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of different ways to tackle this. I mean, you could probably do a talk in and of itself. So I was there was a company that I worked at called Moonpig, and Moonpig allowed people to design greetings cards, paper greetings cards online, and then have them mailed to somebody, a birthday card, or a wedding card or something like that. And we knew that we knew through correlating people who exhibited certain behaviors, right? So people that logged in and engaged with us a certain number of times, even if they didn't purchase a card, and people that purchased more than 2.7 cards per year were our happiest customers. So we surveyed and found out who was happy. Then we looked at the data of their behavior, and we started to, and this was kind of qualitative and quantitative, combining them. Find the happy people, self-reporting, who are happy customers. Then look at their behavior online. And this is for an online business. There are other ways of tackling this if you're not an online business. And then correlate them. And then the patterns to look for. And you can start to, and equally, you should also ask the reverse question, which is find your most unhappy customers and understand their behavior with your product. And when you start to see that, you can start to make adjustments, or you can start to try and save that customer, or you can start to try and minimize the number of customers that exhibit that behavior. So it's this combination of qualitative and quantitative. Happy exhibits this behavior, unhappy exhibits this behavior. And then you can start the 5 whys and everything else. So you talk to those unhappy customers and say, why? Why are you unhappy? Why are you engaging less frequently? Why are you purchasing fewer cards every year? Things like that. So, but every company, you're going to need to know, if you're a PM in the 21st century, you're going to need to know in data. It's kind of like the Matrix, right? There's that guy in the movie, The Matrix, where he could see what was happening in the data. And that's, as PMs, that's kind of what we need to do for happy customers.
Okay. For this next question, I actually had it one of the questions that I wanted to ask. So Anastasia Vanessa says, is that a framework for balancing conflicting needs of the customer versus what is best for the business?
This was, I think it was Khadijah's question, and I didn't actually answer this part. I think it was Khadijah, where she suggested that what's good for the customer and what's good for the company are at odds with each other. Was that? Yeah. And I don't think that needs to be the case. Obviously, you'd like to charge more money, and things like that. You'd like people to use your product. You'd like your product to cost you nothing and to charge people an infinite amount of money for it. But at the end of the day, if you can find that happy balance of value exchange, then you should find a symbiosis, right? A kind of a homeostasis with your users. So I don't think that they need to be at odds, and I don't subscribe to that. I know practically it really feels that way and often plays out that way, but I don't think that they need to be at odds with each other. Is there a framework? Not one that I've discovered. And maybe we should all go and create one. If anyone builds one, happy Anastasia, if you want to take a shot at it, I'll happily work on it with you. And maybe when I come to Lagos, that we can do a ProductTank talk on that.
Yeah. Or like you said, like literally go back to the drawing board and see what is important for the business. And was there anywhere there where you defined what the customer needs, like slightly tilting towards their current needs, and see how. Okay. Anastasia also says, do you have suggestions on how to manage a situation where you've already started to drift and have perhaps lost the confidence of your core target users? How do you get back in and rebuild?
Yeah, so there aren't quick wins in the culture game. Culture is trench warfare. It's I need to find a better metaphor that isn't a war metaphor, but it really is, one step forward, two steps back in the culture game. And I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is right now. And I subscribe to that because there's lots of things we could have, would have, should have done years ago to avoid finding ourselves in the problems that we have now. And the only thing you can do as a PM is start, right? Start making the change. It's not going to be fast. It has to happen at the culture level. And it comes with you starting to model the behaviors, you going into work tomorrow in a meeting, hippo or not, and asking, hey, we're talking about spending a lot of time and effort on this. What's in it for the customer?
Okay. I have a question here from Jessica. In a B2B product that has decision makers and users as different segments, how do I strike a balance between both in relation to customer needs?
This is a really interesting one. It's a great question, Jessica. By the way, all these female PMs, this is great. I love it. Is that, it's a great question. I view decision makers as a customer. And I go back to, I was working at Microsoft a long time ago, and we were selling a very complicated product. It was the kind of product where you sold it to companies that had hundreds of thousands of desktops. And so not only did you sell them the software, but you sold them the software to manage the software, and you sold them the software to roll out the software. And one of the things we discovered, and the product drifted terribly, and we were losing customers and focus and customer loyalty in massive waves because this product was so bad. We're not solving people's problems. And so I listened to customers. I traveled around the world for a month listening to customers in countries all over the world about their problems, their frustrations, and their anger about this product. And one of the things that we discovered was we were really making the decision makers look really bad, right? The people who chose to buy our product looked like really bad decision makers because the product was no good. And that was the first time that it really hit me that this, even though this person, she's not a user, she is a customer. Like, we are delivering really negative value for her, to the point where she cried. Like, when I was interviewing her, she cried because she was so embarrassed and ashamed and felt like she was going to lose her job because she bought this product. And so as a part of our solution, we came up with a framework and a tool to allow the decision makers to show the amount of money the company has saved because they made that decision. So it had nothing to do with the core product that we were selling, but it was about providing value to the decision maker and solving one of their problems, which is looking like they're adding value and feeling like they're adding value to their company. So I do think we can easily make the mistake of not focusing on the decision maker. I think they're key. They have a different set of needs than the user. And so you need to think of them almost as two different customer segments that you're solving for. And the problems that they have are not about the functionality of the product. It's about the problems they have when they're executing the job of deciding to purchase the product. That is what you're helping them solve.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to my third personal question. So while you're trying to avoid the product market drift, how do you balance out customer needs versus survival of the business? So a typical example is like a fintech company in Nigeria, right? They were doing this free card top-ups where there was like a 0.8% cost per transaction at some points, and it could not sustain the users, and users started dropping off. So do you consider that turn off necessarily a product market drift? And what would you recommend that this startup, like this fintech startup, did differently?
That doesn't sound like product market drift. That sounds like they never achieved product market fit,
Oh, wow.
right? They never achieved that balance in the value exchange, right? Where the kind of what the customer was willing to pay was enough to offset their cost to serve the customer, right? And that's my definition of product market fit. And if you can't get there, then the business will die over time. And this kind of goes back to, could you just comment around like what's good for the customer, what's good for the company are often at odds. Like at the end of the day, they're not. Like if the company isn't doing what's right for the customer, the customer is not going to give the company any money, and the company's going to go out of business, right? And that is the typical pattern. So that to me sounds more like a story of a company that never got to that balance in the first place, rather than a company that had it and then kind of drifted over time. I don't know if that's fair assessment of the company, but that's what it sounds like.
Okay. We don't have any unanswered questions. Thank you, everyone, for sending them in. And the comment section is really engaging. So thank you so much, Dave. If you have more questions, you can find Dave on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
Yep.
Please share your questions. If you don't want to share them with him directly, you can tweet at us at ProductTank Lag, and we'll answer them or share them with Dave.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Zainab, for the invite. I really appreciate it. I will, was Anastasia, I think, we'll develop our framework and we'll roll it out at ProductTank Lagos in person sometime in the near future.
Yes, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Have a great evening, everyone. Happy Product Day. Happy World Product Day.
Happy Product Day, everyone. Bye.